There we go. Okay, that should be a lot less horrible. You wait for the sync and try it out. Okay, we are good now. The wonderful world of audio gear. It's not quiet for me, and I'm listening to the playback. It's the same as it's always been. Unless you're talking about the parts where I'm not talking. Yeah, all of you probably just ran and turned your volume down. That's probably it. But I'll boost. So are you sure it's still quiet now? Because once I boost it, it's going to boost it for everybody. Here we go. The boost is loosed. All right, is that good or is that too insane? Is that better? All right, we'll stick with that. Yes, the wild world of audio. I have like 9 audio devices plugged into this computer, so when the microphone fails, it's like a scramble to yank out a bunch of USBs and RCA cables and whatever they are. Okay. Anyway, sorry about that. On to the software licensing nonsense. So, software licenses. A lot of you are running into a situation now where you're picking the final product that you're going to be using to make your code. You're picking your libraries or whatever. You're ripping stuff off the internet. You're chunking it together. So many of you are, just copying left and right, barely writing anything. So let's talk about software licenses for a bit, and then we'll do some ASMR. Okay. So, obvious disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. Don't take it as legal advice. I'm probably wrong about everything, and I'm a total dummy. So, read all the 10,000 page licenses on your own, because that's the only way to know for sure. Sorry. And, yeah, if that's ridiculous, you know it. I mean, to use the internet in a meaningful way, if you actually wanted to read all of the licenses that you were participating in, would require probably like, I don't know, a month of your life every year of just full-time reading licenses just to get started. Like every time Twitter, I mean, I hope none of you use Twitter, but every time they update their licensing terms, you've got to read the whole 30-page license again, technically. So, ugh. All right, so what does it mean for software to be free? This is probably the most annoying thing in software licenses because when I hear free, I think it means that it doesn't cost money. But for some reason, the software licensing community, in large part, has decided that free means that it is freedom. So free as in freedom, not free as in zero cost. These are different things. We'll talk about them in a second. But some licenses use the term gratis for the latter concept, doesn't it cost nothing? And then to make it more annoying, some licenses continue to use the word free, as in zero cost, although that's a rarer usage. So yeah, often have the word free appearing as the freedom definition. The freedom definition. Massimo wants me to fight his custody battle for him, and I'm sorry, Massimo, but you're going to lose your kids. I can't help you. So what is freedom? America. It's bald eagles and Bud Light and the stars and stripes and stuff. No, it's not. It's not that at all in software. Freedom, according to the software licensing industry, is that you can use it for any purpose, but only if anybody else can use yours the same way, which is sort of an odd way of representing freedom. It's kind of like saying, if I use your ingredients that you gave me freely to make an ice cream, then I must also offer that ice cream freely. It sort of makes sense in a kind of morality way. If someone gives you something for free, you have an obligation to give the, let's call it spoils of that thing for free onto others. But it's definitely not the conventional understanding of freedom, so I'm not really sure how this particular definition got to be the dominant one. It's definitely odd and kind of counterintuitive. If you give me something for free, generally we would just assume anything gifted to you is yours, and if somebody tries to kind of make demands upon a gift given to you, that's usually seen as odd. So I'm not really sure again why this is the definition, but this is the mindset you want to be in. So the first kind of free is totally free, and this is also free in the gratis sense too, and that would be public domain. Unfortunately, very little software is public domain. In fact, you'll be hard-pressed to find any software that's public domain. It's genuinely a challenge to find public domain software. Public domain is free from any restrictions. It means do whatever with it, not me problem anymore. Code with no license is not automatically public domain. This is a really big tripping block for a lot of people. And they're like, what? That's stupid. No, code with no license has some sort of implicit copyright claim to it that's not really determined and basically becomes a legal minefield of horror that nobody wants to get into. So most people won't even touch code that doesn't have a license posted to it. It's just awful. It's the worst if the code doesn't have a license at all. Just back away if it doesn't have a license at all, because you have no idea what the ramifications are legally. This is really silly, right? Because if I write like an essay or something and I post it to the internet and I don't license that essay and I don't claim copyright in any way, it's fairly clear that my essay is probably not free for commercial distribution. So if you copy it wholesale and repost it somewhere and try to make money off it, you're probably violating my rights. It's also pretty clear that if I post it to like Facebook or Reddit or something and you quote it and repost it, you are not violating my copyright. So it's kind of strange that software has a rather different approach to it. Now, the one thing that might be really surprising to you is that most help sites, actually almost every help site, has a licensing agreement. Stack Exchange, I'm going to use as an example because that's where most of you copy and paste from, uses the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike license, the CCSA, and depending on what year the comment was submitted, it uses a different version of the CCSA because they keep updating it. So if you really want to know what license your Stack Exchange comment is filed under, you also have to check the comment submission year, cross-reference it, and read the Attribution Share Alike license for different dates that the comment was posted or whatever. So it's really a nightmare to use code from Stack Exchange. Technically speaking, this is actually pretty hilarious. We'll look at that some more in a sec. So the next most permissive license beyond public domain is the permissive license. Many licenses fall under the permissive category. It's probably the broadest category of software licenses. I think most open source software is under the permissive license now, but this is slowly starting to change. The next category is actually growing in popularity, but for now I think permissive is still the most popular. These are licenses like Apache, BSD, and MIT, and many others. So generally, the permissive license will have a few requirements on how the software can be modified or distributed. Generally, it will say that if you do not modify it, so if you import a library that is permissively licensed, but you do not make any changes to it, so if you merely use it but don't modify it, they will generally say that you don't have to do anything, that's just, at that point, similar to a public domain use. It's free. Sometimes they will add additional requirements, but usually if you don't modify it, you can use it without making any other requirements. But generally, if you do modify it, they will ask you to include a similar version of the license. This license will also almost always have a warranty disclaimer, probably always have a warranty disclaimer. Usually it will just say that this license has no warranty, it's provided in as-is condition, there's no warranty available, express or implied. This helps to avoid the situation where your random code on the internet breaks somebody's stuff. I don't know that that's ever actually happened, but apparently at some point that was a concern. Generally, there is a requirement, especially if you do modify it, that you include this license in the work that uses it, and sometimes there's also an attribution requirement, so you must give credit to the author of the work. There is almost never a requirement for any kind of royalty or financial restitution, so this is sometimes called a royalty-free license, and there's usually no requirements on what the derivative works can license themselves under. So as long as you include this license and say this portion of the work was licensed under yada 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 and give credit where credit is due, then you can use this however you wish, and then you can license your finished product however you wish. So that's Apache, BSD, many others again. So this is a good one. So basically, if you find work that's Apache, BSD, or MIT, you can probably use it for your projects. Okay, so the next one, this is probably the most annoying category of software licenses. It's also the most rapidly growing, and it's become very popular in the open source community because people see it as sort of a way to make everything trend towards open sourceness, and that's the copyleft license. Not to be confused with copyright, it's the copyleft license. This is what they call free software in the freedom sense. This is really where that derivation comes from. It's you can use this software for free, but then everything you make with it must also be free. So it's sort of like an infection. As soon as you use it, your entire software becomes consumed by this license. So if you use the software, you may use it, but then you must distribute your work under the same license. So you give others the right to take your code and modify it to make theirs. They are free to study your code, evaluate it. So this is basically part of a movement that wants all code to be posted somewhere, the source code to be available so that others can learn from it and use it. This doesn't mean that you can't charge for your software, though. You can still charge money for it. You just have to make the source code available somewhere, which means that somebody else could technically take that source code and then also charge money for it, but charge less, which creates a very strange dynamic, doesn't it? But somehow it works out for most users. It also creates conflicts with other licenses. I'll show you a hilarious graph on the next slide. But if you have, let's say, part of your software is permissive and part of it is copyleft, that can create an internal conflict. So most GNU licenses fall under this category. You also get the GPL and then the Creative Commons by share alike, which Stack Exchange uses again. So WTF, seriously? If I take a snippet from Stack Exchange, my entire code is now technically copylefted? Copyrighted under a copyleft license? Yeah, seriously, if you take a snippet from Stack Exchange, you are technically obligated to make the whole work copyleft. But a little bit more on why that's not necessarily the case at the end here. So this is hilarious. And this also means that basically the entire software industry is in egregious copyright violation because there's no developer out there that doesn't copy paste from Stack Exchange. It is truly impossible to avoid the copyleft licensing for the most part. I don't think anybody on Stack Exchange will sue you for violating their copyright. I don't think anyone has played that game yet. Somebody asked, what about GitHub? In GitHub, you have to specify a license.readme. If you do not specify one, then it defaults to Apache or something. So anything without a license specified gets a default license, and you can look into that. But otherwise, everything is supposed to have a license.readme on there somewhere. And some folks, some nice folks on Stack Exchange will have something in their signature like all my comments are public domain, but that's a very small percentage of them, unfortunately. So here's a license compatibility graph. Sorry it's blurry, I just took it from Wikipedia. And this is from like 2008 or something, so things have gotten even worse in some regards, but it's like just study this simple tree to see if your software licenses are compatible. This is a profoundly software engineering way to handle the copyrights. Only in the field of software could people have come up with something this stupid, right? This is pretty hilarious. But you see, the permissive licenses are the nicest, and then you've got the weakly protectives like GPL, and then the strongly protectives like the other GPLs, and then you've got your even more protective ones like proprietary. So GNU licenses, GPL, and the share-alike licenses in Creative Commons typically fall under copyleft. All right, then you got your non-commercial use only licenses. These are pretty rare. They're pretty self-explanatory. Use it for anything except commercial use is generally their requirement. Sometimes they'll also have requirements for attribution. They might also have a copyleft requirement, but generally they only require the non-commercial use clause. They'll usually also provide some sort of warranty statement, all the licenses will, and this would be like Creative Commons by non-commercial. So you probably won't see a ton of these. And then in regards to non-commercial, what does non-commercial mean? Because for some of you, when it says free for non-commercial use, well, what if you're making something for free? You're not getting paid. But then the company that you're making it for, obviously, is a for-profit venture, and they do get paid. Generally, the for-profitness of that company is what is taken into account. So the for-profitness is actually transferred onto you. So even if you're not an employee of that organization, you're working for them in the sense that you're making them software, so it actually applies to you. That's pretty annoying, but that's also not true if you make the project open source or freely available. So for example, if you made your project available under a copyleft license, this is why organizations that make a profit are still allowed to use software like that. That's copylefted and open source software. They are also always free to use that software, just like everybody else, as long as it's not licensed for non-commercial use only. And if the project is developed for academic use, there's usually an exception in the license. So your teams will probably fall under both of these exemptions, but both of those exemptions are very confusing. And again, I am not a lawyer, so I don't necessarily know that you're free, but I think you're probably in pretty good territory based on both of those exemptions. And then you got your proprietary licenses, which, if it's not open, if it's not one of these open licenses, then it's proprietary. And if it's proprietary, then read the terms. It's probably going to cost you some money. Okay, so other considerations. Let me go back to proprietary, for example. Let's talk about Unity, for example. So Unity is free as long as you don't make more than $100,000 as an organization, but that transfers to the final party that you are developing for. They make that explicit in their terms, but it's also free for academic use, and you can also make open source projects with Unity. So again, all three of these crazy criteria apply in that category. Very confusing. All right, so last thing is other consideration. So what makes something copyrightable is that it has to be sufficiently complex. Things that are very trivial cannot be copyrighted. So going back to those snippets on Stack Exchange, most of them fall under the triviality exception anyway, because they are too short and too simple to merit any kind of copyrightability. The bar for triviality is completely subjective as far as I understand it, and I really can't tell you what legally triviality means, but I think that under 10 lines is probably fair to say it's going to be trivial. Under 20 lines, I would say also probably fair to say it's going to be trivial. And then you got your other uncopyrightable content. You can't, at this point, until the Oracle versus Google Supreme Court decision is decided, copyright an API or use of an API. So calls to like math.random can't be copyrighted. That kind of stuff obviously is not copyrightable. And if you get those kinds of comments on Stack Exchange, you can probably use those too. But calls to a custom library that someone else wrote might be copyrightable. You also have your fair use, which applies to at least one team here, because educational usage typically falls under the fair use guidelines, but the fair use guidelines for software are, again, quite confusing. John Carroll is also a non-profit, which is usually exempt from many licensing terms, so that also gives us a fair use exemption there. But long story short, read the licenses, try to find works that are permissive. If not permissive, try to find works that are copyleft, but remember that you will have to publish your work as copyleft if you find copyleft works. Think about what license you're going to use for your finished product, because you will have to include one in order to have a finished final product. It will be based obviously on which licenses you've used, because again, if you've used a copyleft license, now you need to apply one to yours. Yeah, just look at those licenses and think about it. Don't just grab stuff off the internet, because if it's proprietary, that could be annoying down the road. You have to take the whole thing out. It'd be really difficult. Okay, so I'd ask if there's any questions, but I probably won't be able to answer them anyway, because all this stuff is so complicated. So enjoy your workday. I will see you in Discord.